I think we're live.
Yay!
Hello volunteers. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Megan Ferreter. I'm the project coordinator for the Smithsonian Transcription Center, and this is Lesley Parilla, who's the cataloging coordinator for the Field Book Project. It knows all the secrets inside the field notes, so we'll ask you about that
Okay.
in a little bit as well. Thank you for joining us today. We wanted to share some analysis we've done of several coordinated social media campaigns that we have conducted so far. One was in February 2015, which is the main one we'll discuss today. And then we also did a bit of investigation of a similar campaign that ran in October of 2015. And maybe if you listen carefully at the end of the broadcast, you might hear there's another coordinated social media campaign on its way. So a couple of things. First of all, thanks, Lesley, for joining us, and also for leading the charge with this particular line of inquiry, because what we found is very interesting, and we want to talk more about that. Volunteers, as you're watching today, you can send us questions. We really want to hear your feedback and impressions about our analysis and our interpretations of this particular experience with a coordinated social media campaign. So you can communicate us by tweeting at transcribe.si, or you can email transcribe@si.edu. And even if you are watching this after the broadcast and you want to share your feedback, please go ahead and email those or tweet those comments to us, and we'll do our best to answer those questions. So we know that what we're talking about today is related to the Field Book Project. Would you give just a little bit of background about the Field Book Project?
Sure. The Field Book Project started, I think, almost 6 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, we've been around quite a while. And the project started because one of our botanists was trying to find the field books that document the botany collection at Smithsonian. A lot of those specimens actually came from the U.S. exploring expedition. And he was
also known as the Wilkes Expedition?
Oh, the Wilkes Expedition.
Right.
Yeah, he was not a likable guy, but that's another story. So the specimen tags were actually, the ink was becoming illegible.
Oh, wow.
So
you needed the field notes.
He needed the field notes, and it turns out the field notes did not come with the specimens. They went back to the institutions with the scientists, and so he started looking, and after about, I think, 10 years, he found them at 12 different institutions up and down the East Coast. So he worked with Anne Van Camp, who's the director of Smithsonian Archives, to come up with an idea of the Field Book Project, where we would work with the departments across natural history, as well as Smithsonian Archives, to identify and catalog the field books at an item level, which is not something you usually are able to do within archives, because we recognize there is high research value and that these materials tend to vary quite a bit in format and context, and that a lot of information that scientists and the general public would really find interesting, they didn't know it was there, and thus they didn't know how to find it. So we started cataloging with a long-term view of trying to digitize these and eventually make the text actually searchable, which is where Transcription Center comes in.
You come in.
And this would not be possible without Transcription Center. And so because we had already been working with Smithsonian Archives to get these materials cataloged, which provided the metadata for the digitized materials, we had this great bank of digitized materials to go into Transcription Center. And so even though we are a very small project with very few staff, we've had a good amount of material to put up through Smithsonian Archives to have transcribed and have the data actually accessible.
Right. So if you have participated in transcription and you were part of these challenges, you will remember several handles in social media or pages in social media. And so those are obviously Transcribe SI and also at Fieldbook Proj, but also Smithsonian Arch, ARCH, BioDiv Library, and SI Library. So those are all the handles that you probably interacted with during these campaigns, and it's important that we make it clear that all of these people were involved in this process, because it was many hands making light work and coordinating these activities, which we will describe in just a little bit. One question I had for you, and actually I should say also, Field Book Project material encompasses some of our Transcription Center favorites, the Baileys, Alexander Wetmore. We just had wonderful Wetmore and Winter of Wetmore with Smithsonian Archives. We also had Waldo Schmidt and Steiniger, and of course, Frederick W. True. So I had some questions for you about your role, very briefly. One is, would you tell us a little bit more about your role, and what does a week look like when you're cataloging? Because this is, we are looking at what you have cataloged, but what does that consist of? Because you're the person who really gets to see in depth in what's going on in these field notes.
I've probably cataloged now a third to a half of the materials of the 8,000 field books. No, 8,100 field books that have been cataloged.
Right.
I've been with the project since almost the beginning. So I luckily get to see, a lot of the materials.
Yeah.
As the project has developed and my role in it, I've taken on more of a coordinating role, which is really exciting because I know the materials so well, but I also get to talk with the departments we've already cataloged with, as well as initiate contact with departments we haven't cataloged with yet.
Right.
And we've recently been in touch with Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center, with Mineral Sciences just this week, with Smithsonian Educational Research Center, and also with the Tropical Research Installation in Panama. And all of them have been sending us more collections that we're in the midst of processing to be cataloging. And some of those will be digitized and hopefully put into Transcription Center just in the next year and a half.
That's great. Some of those different parts of the institution that you've mentioned, or research centers, actually also have citizen science projects that are not transcription. That I just want to give a shout out to, for example, Neighborhood Nest Watch, which is part of the Migratory Bird Center, which is a great project. And we may have some material coming from the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute soon. So watch for that. We'll see if we can get that off the ground. So what are some of the best parts of your job?
Getting to read people's stuff. One of the things that I love about especially natural sciences, and I'm a liberal arts English major, so this was not what I was
one of the other questions I was going to ask you is how did
not expecting to be in this background, and I did not realize how much I would enjoy working with the natural sciences materials, especially at Smithsonian, because the line between the personal and the professional doesn't really exist. And as actually one of my colleagues today at Invertebrate Zoology, where I'm also cataloging great stuff, was talking about the fact that often the scientists who are creating these field notes, their profession is also their hobby. And so there's no split. They do it on their off time because they love it. They bring their family members into it. They bring their friends. So, you'll hear stories about people getting married and taking their honeymoon while doing field work. Or their son or daughter may meet their significant other.
The Blackwellers, they did that, right?
Several. It turns out more than I'm finding more and more of these people who, they get married and take their honeymoon, then go do field work. And so people are staying and working on this stuff even past retirement. They're staying and they're working and creating field notes until they pass away.
Right.
And so
it's a bit of a way of life, recording that. And I think you mentioned in passing the other day that you found some examples of parents who were scientists having their children start to try to create.
And so
observations.
That personal aspect of, like, I'm working on the field notes right now of Horton H. Hobbs. His son, Horton H. Hobbs III, is actually noted in the collections of when he was out in the field with him, which specimens are from him. He also went out with his wife, Georgiana. They're the little personal notes. Even a lot of the more modern, of course, field notes that I'm working on tend to be more regulated. They're often what look like data sheets. And in some cases, you might think it wouldn't be something we'd want to catalog because this is stuff that you can find in a database. But the scientists, especially if it's being recorded in the field, they're still putting their personal mark. They're still writing things like, some ass lit a field on fire next door and I can't see anything. Which, I'm not saying that necessarily has a lot of scientific meaning, but there are those things that differentiate it from just a database that may be virtually accessible. Those little touches that give that sense of humanity, that give the background, let alone a historic context to a period of research that I have no background in. I feel like I've learned more about world and American history in just the last few years than I ever did in school.
I would imagine that our volunteers may have some similar observations of making connections of, I remember this from history class, but here's a person referencing this historical event, or similar types of situations. So last question before we go ahead and move into our presentation. What is the most interesting thing you've uncovered this year in field notes? Okay. If you want to narrow it down into the last month or so.
I mean, there are two things I love, but there is one that I am incredibly fond of, and it just came in the last few weeks, and I am in love. And it's a logbook from Caribou Research Station, just off the coast of Belize.
Right.
And it is essentially a community field book. It, to me, is sort of the embodiment of what Fieldbook Project is.
Mm-hmm.
They maintain a logbook on this tiny little research station, and visiting researchers and the station managers will record daily notes in it.
Right.
And so it covers 1999 through 2010.
Oh, it's very recent.
It is very recent. And they just turned it over to us a few weeks ago. And there's a current one, so a few years now down the road, we'll get another one. This has the station managers, who it turns out there are one or two of them who are very good at watercolors, and so they'll put their own watercolors in it. Mm-hmm. But there were also researchers, visiting researchers who went out with their families, and their children put in field observations and drawings. There's a 3.5-year-old that turned it into a coloring book. There are conversations about what they're looking for, daily events, a couple bits of information about first aid if you step on, I guess, a squid. I can't remember exactly what was going on there. It's little cartoons and just all the sorts of aspects of fieldwork that are fascinating. The documentation of the environment, the documentation of the wildlife, the documentation of the life of the scientist, of the family, of the people who are visiting. Plus, it's really pretty. It's really, really pretty. And I can't wait to read more after the volunteers transcribe it, so I can read them.
Actually, this is a great segue. I had said that was the last question, but I lied. Okay. Actually, this is the last question, which is, would you tell us just a little bit more about the ways that you use the transcribed text? Because you are a person who has told me a little bit about the way that you use transcribed text to search for certain things in Collection Search Center. So using we'll explain this a little bit more in our presentation, but in the general workflow is that after you've transcribed text, volunteers, and it is indexed within the Smithsonian's Enterprise Digital Asset Network, EDN, it makes it searchable within our Collection Search Center. And we know a little bit about how external researchers use this, the material and the data that you're creating, but we actually have learned a lot about the way staff members are using it as well.
It's funny because there are things that I'll remember as I catalog, things that really stick out in my mind, but if I were to try to go back and find those exact pages, I rarely have the time to do that. And so one of the things I started doing with Fieldbook Project was, as field books that I had found particularly entertaining or been intrigued by, I was able to use the transcriptions and search for specific terms that were used by those creators to develop a sense of to actually document patterns of behavior and actually find some of the quotes that I had loved so much. And so one of the things I had done with Dahl actually was, I remember
William Hilly Dahl, so you'll remember him because he has beautiful handwriting, and he was a very young man in some of the notes that we were transcribing.
I had remembered him making several references to the Russians and how frustrated with the Russians he was during the year that they wintered over in Alaska. So I went through and just started searching for Russia, Russians, and I was actually able to find how many times he was actually referring to it, to determine it wasn't just my memory that he was making these. And then I ended up going through
and the search will hopefully have brought you to the page level. So the thumbnail of the actual page in which those phrases are used.
Plus, in the online version of the PDF, it'll actually show you on the side where it appears and how many times. So I was able to get a sense of whether it was something that was fairly prominent, or if I was simply remembering something that was very, very tangential in the writing. And one of the things I was able to find was actually the fact that Dahl was listing the types of baking he was doing as the winter got longer and longer, and he got more fixated on what he was cooking and actually listed date by date. And then one of the other things that I recently did, I've been in love with Waldo Schmidt's letters to his wife. I love it, and as anyone who has experienced Waldo Schmidt, his writing is horrendous. So I finally, after all these years, went back to the 1960s volumes of his work in Antarctica that were done in Transcription Center, and was able to find the letters that he wrote to his wife, because I couldn't remember how many did he write, which ones was I thinking about, and his nickname was Stummy. So all I had to do was search for that, and I was able to find those letters, because one of the things I loved when I was going through and digitizing that volume, because I really, really wanted it in Transcription Center, so I actually I cataloged and digitized it. Was his
we should also give a quick shout out to Kira Sobers, who does digitization here with Smithsonian Institution Archives and does a bulk of the heavy lifting on the digitization. So thanks, Kira.
That experience of digitizing those two volumes really made me appreciate Kira's work even more.
Right.
But I loved the fact that he was talking about his work to someone who was a non-scientist, and so it was a very general audience friendly way. Also, the fact that they had already been married for so many decades, and to hear the affection in the wording that he was using, and the fact that he was writing to her about, don't worry about the expenses, this is what I'm getting paid. And so I was able to actually pull those letters out, put them in a Word document, and now I can listen to them.
That's very cool.
Because I keep thinking, I would love to be able to pull out that kind of correspondence from the field books, and at some point, I don't know if it would be an exhibit
or an app
or something, so that other people can see those personal dialogues that are going on, where they're talking about the work, they're talking about the science, but they're talking in a way that anybody can understand. And I'm only able to find that kind of stuff because it's been transcribed and it's been indexed, and I'm not having to go page by page through the handwritten material to find it.
Right. So thank you, volunteers, for making that possible. All right, are we ready to move into our presentation?
Sure.
Okay, so we're going to bring up our slides. We need to ask you, the public who's watching at this moment, if the slides are not advancing, would you please let us know? Again, tweet at TranscribeSI or email us. We think that they will, but you never know what will happen when we go live with this technology. So we're going to try to screen share, and hopefully that will move us into the slides. And I think this will be us. One moment, we're still looking. I want to get us into the start of the slides. Thanks for your patience. Here we are. Okay, so the system tells me that we're sharing the screen, so hopefully we are live with you all now. So Lesley and I did a little bit of investigation of some of our coordinated social media campaigns, again, with multiple social media representatives, so multiple social media accounts, and we were focused around particular sets of material. And we started with this research question: how do coordinated social media campaigns support online citizen science engagement? Specifically investigating transcription of field notes. So we want to make it very clear that we are talking about citizen science engagement from a perspective of both liberating the data from the field notes, making that data searchable using the systems that are supporting Smithsonian Transcription Center and Eden and Collection Search Center, as well as databases in other places, and then also the ways that the public are engaging with the content, the scientific content, the scientific history, and just in general, all of the context that Lesley has been describing from these field notes. That was our research question. So Lesley, would you give us a little bit of background on, we have on the left-hand side a picture of field notes. So tell us a little bit more about what happened and how we had this opportunity.
So one of the big focuses, long-term visions of the field project has been to be able to reconnect the field note documentation back to the specimen, since a lot of that information doesn't necessarily get transferred to the specimen tag. But finding a discrete set of materials where we could do that has been somewhat problematic, because the documentation that's in the field notes will have a field number, but doesn't necessarily easily map to the final accession number that it has in the Smithsonian system. So as we've talked with departments about cataloging, we've tried to see if an opportunity would present itself. And when we started talking with Nick Pinson in paleobiology, he was able to identify a discrete set of field notes that directly corresponded with research that he was doing. And the benefit was the fact that FWTrueLove had such a large number of personal and professional relationships with people across the Smithsonian and across his profession. So it really presented us with a possibility of putting them materials into Transcription Center, have them transcribed, and demonstrate how they were of value. And since in a lot of ways we've always thought of the virtual volunteers as being very similar to the volunteers on site in terms of why they're working on the materials, it seemed like it would be a great way for giving them additional access to actually talk to Nick Pinson about the work he does and why these field notes were of value to him, to use this as a test run to see if we could build a campaign, give that additional access, and information about the materials, and whether that would inspire the volunteers to work more on those materials and get them transcribed faster.
Right. And one thing that we will probably touch on again later in the presentation, but just to call this out specifically here, is that this is a different workflow than our general way of bringing material into Transcription Center. So sometimes we're asked, in fact, one of the questions we were asked in social media beforehand was, how do we choose which projects to work on, just in general, to highlight any campaign like this, or more generally within the Transcription Center? So we talked about today, so far, we've kind of described two different pathways. One is the general Fieldbook project pipeline, which is being surfaced and brought into Smithsonian Transcription Center by Smithsonian Institution Archives. And that is a kind of consistent release of projects. As some projects are finished, new projects are released. And reminder, if you're new to the Transcription Center, that new projects come online weekly, if not daily, within the Transcription Center. And this second pathway we're talking about now is, again, a specific set of materials that seem to have many benefits for being transcribed and many opportunities for engagement. And around that, and additionally, it became clear that maybe we could make this something a little bit more than just unstructured transcription experience.
Make it a little more of an event.
Right. So very briefly, for most of you who are watching, you know what this is. It's our homepage for the Transcription Center. But I'll just very quickly touch on, for those who may be joining us and want to know more about the Transcription Center. This is a project that was launched in June 2013, and we consider it a service, a program of engagement, and a website. So it's available to anyone around the world 24 hours a day. What happens in this space is that volunteers transcribe and collaborate with staff as well to transcribe and review digitized objects from the Smithsonian's collections. This is typically things like diaries and field notes, ledgers, photo albums. You can see in this picture, there's some pictures of certified proofs from the National Numismatics collections. And today we're talking specifically about the Fieldbook Registry, Fieldbook project materials. And additionally, anyone can transcribe, and only registered volunteers can review. So the peer review process then pushes material that has been completely transcribed and reviewed into an approval step for Smithsonian staff. So again, this is why we think about this as collaborative on many levels. So anytime we say a number of pages have been completed, we really are meaning at least 2 people have touched the page, sometimes 3 or even more than that. One thing I will just interject here is that we recently, this weekend, hit 175,000 pages transcribed, which is absolutely incredible. Thank you, everyone who's contributed to the Transcription Center so far. And that seems to be about 100,000 pages transcribed since this time last year, which is just fabulous and mind-boggling, and all sorts of celebratory gifts imagine in your head here. So this is our general interpretation. This is the way I describe you all when people ask me, who are your volunteers? I say that you are passionately curious individuals. So if you, today as we're describing our interpretations of you as a group, if you feel that there are other reasons that you transcribe, or you want to give us other feedback, please get in touch and feel free to correct us. If you don't feel that this describes you, we'd love to hear what you think does describe you. So we know from some many discussions with volunteers, both directly via focus group and also from some preliminary survey data, that our volunteers, you all, like to fulfill your personal interests. You like to use your free time to give back to the Smithsonian Institution, as well as other public projects, citizen science projects, digital humanities projects, and other sorts of activities, and that you are working together to make scientific field notes and collections more accessible for researchers and improving upon Smithsonian's collections data. And in general, we've had visits, in the last 2 years, we've had volunteers from 157 countries. All time, we've had visits from about 187 countries. And the average time on site is about 15.5 minutes. And this is a particularly important piece of information that we'll kind of unpack later. But when we are talking about engagement in a digital space, it's sometimes hard to assess. And in our particular space with the Transcription Center, it's hard to assess because we encourage you to explore and discover and leave, move between pages. But when we look at these numbers, it suggests to us that there's something worthwhile and interesting to you, and that's why you spend the time here on site. If you were not interested, clearly you would leave more quickly, and you're also spending a fairly extended period of time for each visit. So again, we'll dig into that a little bit more. When I took a look into some of our numbers, we realized that we have a life cycle for our volunteers, and we are very comfortable with the fact that we have a life cycle of volunteer participation. So 33% of our volunteers work on 1 to 4 transcription activities. And when we say transcription activity, we mean anything from transcribing a word to transcribing a whole page. It's a little bit hazy in that sense, but we know that it's a brief engagement. So when we look, the bulk of our participants are doing between 1 and 20 activities on site. So when we think about that opportunity to connect with people, we know that some of these kinds of campaign activities could reach in and encourage people to stay or contribute a little bit more. And ultimately, if we think about trying to grow the transcription center or grow the activity, we know we want to slightly boost that bottom number, whether it's asking the number of people, that 33%, to do 6 transcription activities, or trying to get more people doing 1 to 4 activities. Those are some of the points of analysis that we pull out from this kind of information, and that we can start to build into strategy for how or why we might implement campaigns in particular points. I would argue that the Transcription Center is still very young, launched in June 2013. I guess it's not that young, it's a three-nager almost, a toddler. It's gone through its terrible twos, and now we've moved on into our third and robust year. And we continue to grow from strength to strength, but we also, in a lot of ways, are still learning, because we have new types of material, new opportunities to engage with volunteers, new people who have subject matter interests in different spaces join us every single day. So we continue to evaluate and think about ways of engaging with volunteers. So this is a little bit of the workflow. Again, I mentioned that volunteers transcribe and review materials contributed by 14 Smithsonian units, but the truth is it's actually 15 Smithsonian museum, archives, and libraries. And we're welcoming the National Museum of the American Indian Archive Center as our most recent participant, and excited to share their materials with you as well. But volunteers on site also do peer mentoring and sharing information, and they share their discoveries. And this is one of the most exciting parts of my role, is connecting with you all and not only seeing and being interested in the types of things that you're transcribing and what you think is interesting, but the ways that you help one another and support one another as you are learning how to transcribe, or you see someone who's new and you invite them, or you leave notes on the page to try and help them with their activities or get them up to speed and past or around that learning curve really quickly. So thank you for those of you who do share information and do peer mentoring on site. It's very valuable, and I know that the volunteers who are experiencing that are very grateful for those experiences. So as our volunteers, as you all work together to transcribe and review an item, so when we say an entire item, we're meaning like a diary, that once that is completed, within about 10 minutes to an hour, that material becomes text searchable in Smithsonian's Collection Search Center. And so you can see in this slight little graphic that we have the picture of the transcribing page, and then you can see the ways in which that particular page would be surfaced if you were to search using some of the ways that Lesley described. So we can do keyword searching in Collection Search Center, which is collections.si.edu. If you'd like to try, you are welcome to explore some of the field notes or other items that you have transcribed if you want to try to find them. We also make, in this image, you can see right above the transcription window, there's a little PDF button. And on the project page and on the individual transcription page, there is a PDF that's available for download for free for you to use if you're a researcher or you just would like to take it away. Sometimes other volunteers use those PDFs to help them when they're doing a related project. So for example, they're working on someone's specimens list. They can print that and use it as a reference because the handwriting is not always the most legible. And then since this, you'll see, I have not updated our stats because we actually have surpassed this number. We're past 175,000 pages. And we are in the space now of really being an organically growing model of collaboration and problem solving. And what we notice specifically is that when you all encounter a problem, you surface that problem to us, and you are asking us to help to share a solution. So you frequently, when you find a problem, you will say, there's a problem with this page, and then you'll make a suggestion of what you think would be the appropriate solution. And that sounds like maybe very obvious to some of you, but that's not the case for all systems. It's not the case for all projects where you're engaging with the public. And the fact that you feel empowered to share that information with us is really powerful to me, and makes me feel confident that you are committed to improving the system and that you're committed to helping one another. So again, thank you for that activity. And then just to wrap up this particular slide, this again comes back down to a comment or a question mark over what are the types of motivations that volunteers show. And again, this is based on the feedback that you've provided to me. So if you have other things that you'd like to add to this list, please get in touch and share. So a couple of reasons that we both speculate and have heard from you. One is due to the flexible nature of the website. So sometimes that's referred to as a choose your own adventure, in the sense that you come into the project, you can move forward and backward through pages. So if you've transcribed something, you can see what was on the page before. Let's say you became interested in the story, you were like, who is this Stummy person? And let me read more. You can go to the page before and try to gather some more context. You also can very easily move between projects. So you can start working on one set of field notes and then change to a different set of field notes, or to astronomical logbooks, or to certified proofs, or to biodiversity specimens, or to artist diaries. Any of those things could happen all within the, a 6-click range. You could move quickly between projects. You also enjoy the experience of discovering the connections between materials and scientists. You report that you like to pursue personal goals of learning and to become part of something bigger than yourself, and also because you recognize the importance of making this data available to everyone, which is one of the reasons, one of our foundational reasons. Our foundational goal for the Transcription Center was to create text that could be used to make the items more discoverable. And so again, we're talking a lot about Collection Search Center and the way that the text that's created with the Smithsonian Transcription Center is indexed in Eden, which makes it discoverable, those items more discoverable in Collection Search Center. And then finally, it has been alleged that you enjoy the challenge of deciphering text and the feelings of success that come when completing projects together as part of campaign activity, which is a pretty good segue into the following question.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, so when we know that we have goals around our materials, when I say this, when I'm using we in this sense, I'm thinking about Smithsonian staff. Smithsonian staff have goals, but it's not a one-way street in the Transcription Center. We want to make sure it's a two-way street. So first of all, we want to make sure that we make it an enjoyable and supportive experience for volunteers. Now I'm using the Transcription Center we. Transcription Center wants to meet volunteer motivations and support volunteer needs, and then also support staff members and museum and archive and library goals of making a steady pace, creating a really robust and thriving atmosphere. And so there's a couple of ways that maybe could be achieved. And one way is through campaigns.
So I guess so I started here as a volunteer. So I guess part of that's what I love about the Transcription Center.
That's why we're here.
Is that, at least from what I've seen of that open quality and the fact that the volunteers, the transcription volunteers do seem to feel very empowered, and they are willing to go well beyond just the task of transcribing and reviewing and finding new ways of using information. That, in many ways, I think, is how I view the relationship with Transcription Center. If it is a partnership. And so from that standpoint, thinking about why I ended up coming to the Smithsonian and why I stayed and why I keep staying is part of why the same reasons that
unique opportunities.
Yeah, exactly. To the unique, the ability to see behind the scenes, the ability to interact with people who are creating the science, to hear the stories, to experience that in a way that is possible virtually, since we're not able to get everybody here for a behind the scenes tour, which would be awesome.
Yeah. Well, we have these tools that can let us go the distance. And we can meet you where you are.
And being able to do that with multiple departments through the existing social media platforms that we do have. So the Fieldbook Project has Twitter and a blog. SIL and BHL obviously have far more. Transcription Center has several social media platforms, and being able to make that and really put it together in more of a story and kind of putting all that information into context and making the transcription experience more enriching.
Right. So our campaigns in general kind of meet the idea of anyone who has gone through kind of, personal learning goals and objectives. They talk about SMART goals. So our campaigns really kind of reflect some of those things. There's specific set of activities or specific goals that we're chasing. It's measurable. It's achievable. We don't ask you to do, everything that's on site. We give you a subset of material to do. It's a realistic goal, and we do have a time-bound component, time binding component to that. So the additional thing is, as we mentioned, by contrast to the general experience of working in the transcription center, a campaign really creates a targeted focus around a discrete set of material. And again, this will be important as we continue to describe campaigns. And in general, and we welcome questions about this as well, but some of the ways that we have created campaigns are as a combination, a nice blend of direct emails, cross-promotional social media posts, which I think is one of the most important parts of that, and then also creating a digital atmosphere that has additional context about collections that are being transcribed. So links, blog posts, resurfacing existing content, telling those stories, and creating opportunities for you as participants to tell us new stories, things that we don't know or that we've missed that have fallen between the cracks.
So when the FWTrueLove campaign was the first that we put together, and that was largely coordinated by the Fieldbook Project staff. So what we ended up doing was working to develop a schedule with Biodiversity Heritage Library, with Nick Pineson, with the Pineson Lab, with archives, libraries, and with Transcription Center to get things kind of lined up so that we would be able to kind of create this experience and put the information and the materials that were to be transcribed into context. Because I think all this information is out there as the volunteers have experienced on their own. Mm-hmm. You can find these connections, but if you don't necessarily know what to look, or if you're new to Transcription Center, you're not going to necessarily know where to look. Right. So by coordinating with these 5 pieces, putting that together, we made it much easier for the volunteers to find that connection, especially with Nick Pineson, since he knew the materials so well. The Fieldbook Project was able to kind of lead that. The nice thing is that it provided a template so that if the campaign worked out well, which of course it did, it's something that could be recreated around a new topic, a new group of materials.
Right. And so specifically, we wanted to call out what collaboration meant to us. And in this particular case, we're kind of using coordination and collaboration interchangeably. So there's a combination of activities. So first of all, selecting the materials or figuring out what should be surfaced, and then really kind of paring down what was selected, because we had other options. Mm-hmm. We also wanted to know if we could use a combination of existing digitized material, or did we need to digitize everything that we were going to transcribe for this particular campaign? Were there connections between what was being selected in this material and existing things that have been transcribed? So, doing some scaffolding in that space. So that was kind of the first step, and that, I believe, started in the kind of January timeframe. Yep. This was a relatively rapid campaign as well that we created, but that started in the January timeframe, and then at the same time, we were working together to research and gather context. Nick and his colleagues led some of that portion of the activity of creating really a framing of who Frederick W. True was, what was his significance to the institution, the ways he is both still very important for scientific research, but also important to the institutional history and his activity and the connections and decisions that he made and how that had knock-on effects for other things. So doing all that research and gathering context, we then created, scheduled, and posted certain sets of content. And then we had a shared calendar that we were following to share information. But the kind of in between the start and the end of that material being transcribed was very active and what I would describe as pretty loose, in the sense of we were connecting content as you were transcribing things and sharing what you were learning, volunteers, with us. We were then trying to help connect you to further pieces of information, asking you more questions. Very dynamic.
Yeah, it was a lot of responding and building on your activity.
Right. And so we tried to use a consistent hashtag of FWTrueLove for a number of reasons. One, to use the structural affordances of Twitter to then pull be able to serve together, but also to publicly show that we were talking about something that was related, that the comments and questions that were flying around were all related to one another. So that's the kind of idea of what collaboration was for us in planning this. So this was the launch email that we shared. So if you were a participant in the FWTrueLove campaign, you may recall that we launched this on the day before Valentine's Day as the FWTrueLove challenge. So we had the first component of FWTrueLove as a hashtag. We actually had a second component of FWTrueDetective. So if you were watching television in this particular time period, watching subscription cable, you may have known there was a television show called True Detective. So we were able to play off that and ask our volunteers, ask you all to share with us particular pieces of information. We were specifically interested in location information, comments around correspondence with whom True and other people were corresponding, and I think other particular events of note. And so that many of you did actually undertake that part of the challenge as well, but the main bulk was kind of really more describing True's connections with various people that we had in the transcription center already, and other people as well. So Frederick William True, the most interesting curator in the world. This particular visual relates to, meme here, relates to True's work encouraging lighthouse keepers to collect data on stranded specimens and marine mammals. So kind of, you know, taking advantage of what was occurring right in front of them to gather information and data and then share that back. So is here in this citizen science and crowdsourcing right here. Yeah. So he was a perfect candidate. So here he is looking very dapper, or maybe being quizzical, I'm not sure. So the launch of our FWTrueLove campaign, again, as we said, in January and February, we were preparing and digitizing materials, as well as preparing and gathering content that we were going to share across digital platforms. I would say that although this campaign ran in other social media spaces as well, it really was a Twitter-focused campaign. So we did a couple of things. On February 13th, we launched 3 projects of just under 400 pages. And that was actually completed on February 17th. So I could show you, if you're interested later, the kind of run of tweets, but it was on February 17th, it was all completed. So within 4 days, 400 pages was completed. That was a substantial amount of material to complete in the transcription center at that time. And also over a holiday weekend, where you should be, you know, out on the town and buying red roses. Yeah. So then we had already planned ahead that we would have a hangout with Nick Pyenson, Dr. Pyenson at that time, and we did. So at that time, he gave us an overview again of True's importance, the significance of True to Nick's own research. And then at the very end of that hangout, we launched the remaining projects. And then, because Nick was a very busy individual, we were able to schedule 2 additional hangouts with him on March 3rd. And that consisted of a hangout specifically looking at some of the type specimens from True's research, and then going into the Coleman Library and seeing some of the rare books, which was really cool. All of it was really cool. I was looking at some of those. And we should mention as well that that last set of hangouts was supplemented with live tweeting and sharing images. And that was a really successful way of providing context, not only a live stream of what was in the room, dealing with some technical difficulties with Google Hangouts, and then also being able to show varying angles of what was happening in the room. Mm-hmm. And when I go back and look at it, it makes me remember what it was like to be a part of that experience. So I hope that it felt the same for volunteers. So again, this is some of the data about the FWTrueLove campaign, the challenge, the part 1 challenge, where we ended up with 328 tweets in total, and that were using the hashtag FWTrueLove, and then 33 using the True Detective. We had 219 mentions of the Fieldbook Project. The campaign email that I sent was opened by 2,002 people, and 196 people clicked into the first project that was surfaced in that campaign email. And as a summary, that we had 6 projects in total. That was 523 pages that were transcribed within 2 phases in less than 2 weeks. So again, at that time, that was a lot of material it was a specifically large amount of material that was all around the same content to be transcribed at the same time. So again, this idea of being focused. In general, we had an average of 22 volunteers per project, and 60 volunteers in total participated in the project. We had 3 hangouts with Dr. Pyenson, and then this was kind of the time frame of launching on the 13th of February and ending on the 3rd of March. So at the end of this, we had, okay, first of all, this is now a template for a campaign that we could run. But we also wanted to think about what happened. But actually what we did was we kind of caught our breath and thought, what just happened? Maybe we should try to analyze that.
Let's see what's there. Mm-hmm. So one of the things I've found very interesting was, I mean, obviously when we were looking at the numbers of what was being completed by the volunteers, I just kept thinking, wow, there's just so much being done. And I kept thinking, especially now having more time pass, I've been really fascinated watching the fact that the transcription center community keeps growing at a pretty steady rate. And it's grown over, more than 1 year. And often I'll hear questions about, how does it get more volunteers? And I don't think I've really ever seen Transcription Center make a big call out for volunteers except at the very beginning, which made me think that maybe there was something going on with the kind of structure and response communication that has developed between the Transcription Center and the volunteers. So that was where I thought, especially with TrueLove, since we were able to get such distinct numbers, not just through Transcription Center, but also from BHL's social media staff, it seemed like it was worth looking at to see if maybe the way the Transcription Center is structured and the kind of structured experience with the open experience was maybe helping its own community to grow. So that's where these numbers kind of started from.
Right, and when you say open, you mean the in quotation marks, the normal experience of transcribing, which is choose what you want, versus when you say structured, you mean
I guess
more
I
narrowly
should
focused
throw
campaign.
some context in terms of the Fieldbook project that actually looked at other transcription sites where it might have contributed its material to be transcribed. But one of the problems we had, or challenges, is the fact that even though we're the Fieldbook project, we're field documentation. We're not just bound volumes. We're not just photographs. We're not just correspondence. We'll take anything as long as it's documenting the field observations and the specimen collecting, which doesn't fit well with many of the other transcription sites, which like to create a very structured project. And so that's one of the things that I've loved about Transcription Center, and I thought was kind of interesting about the fact that it is very open. It fits well to accept just about anything, which Smithsonian needs, because Smithsonian is very large, very organic, so many different types of museums and research centers and such. So to then see the effect of having a time-bound, structured experience, to think about what is that like of going from open to structured instead of structured all the way through.
Right. So in order to kind of investigate this a little bit more cleanly, we're gonna show behind the curtain. Lesley and I actually tried many different ways of analyzing this information, and what happens frequently within the Transcription Center is that there's always something happening in Transcription Center. So to try and get in, if you want to say a normal time period or clean data in the sense of like this is our we're not adding any variables, is actually very difficult. But these particular sets of information we thought showed some consistent relationships. It was these things are related to one another, and we think all of these things could clearly be shown to relate to having that more open or flexible experience versus a structured campaign experience. So what we did was we looked at 2-week time periods before, during the FWTrueLove challenge, and then after. And so you can see that this covers the month before, the 2-week period in January, a 2-week period in February, and a 2-week period in March. And in general, you can see that the before column is smaller numbers than the FWTrueLove column, except for length of visit. So in general, it looks like, okay, there's some increases. What does this look like in general? We've got some increases in replies, we've got some increases in active volunteers, and we also have some increases in pages transcribed. We also seem to vaguely see a relationship that the month after, there's some sustained elevated activity and sustained communication, maybe not in this particular case, but again, every month is a little bit different in Transcription Center. So across the board, from the before period to the FWTrueLove period, we saw
increased interaction. And what we were trying to put together in terms of, there was a little bit of educated guessing in terms of, we have a feeling of what inspires you to work. Could we make a campaign that would specifically target benefits to you for that work? And so those were the kinds of things we were looking for, is to see, was there an increase in interaction as well as an increase in transcription, since we're trying to make this an experience and not just a process of getting more pages transcribed. So it was great to see that increase in transcription, as well as your replies, your
Right.
questions, your comments, the number of visits, all of that increasing. So it looks like we came up with the kinds of things that would inspire and reward in some level the work that and effort that you were putting towards getting the work transcribed.
Right. So in general, we are seeing that there was an increase in transcription, an increase in site visits, an increase in active volunteers, and an increase in replies. And all of these things seem to be related to specifically what we were asking you all to do during this particular campaign time period. And especially the you all are a very dynamic and active bunch, and you communicate very vocally with us already. So seeing an increase in replies really seemed to indicate to us that you were interested in rising to the challenge of finding particular pieces of information and sharing your discoveries. So our general findings to start with were that through a coordinated social media campaign, we see increased volunteer interaction, increased transcription output, and an increase in the number of active volunteers. So there are some other outlying different kind of campaign experiences that you may have been a part of it with the Transcription Center, including We Dig Bio, which was a coordinated event, not a campaign, but rather a coordinated event. And in that case, we saw similar kinds of things, but for example, in that case, we saw an increase in active volunteers on particular types of projects. So in this case, we're seeing an increase across the entire Transcription Center. And again, we saw a decrease in the average length of the visit during the coordinated social media campaign. And we speculate that may be because new and active volunteers specifically wanted to work on the things that we were highlighting in the campaign, and they were done. So you can see some of you are talking on Twitter at the moment saying that if you don't move swiftly during a campaign, you will lose the opportunity to work on something. And that is one of the unfortunate aspects of having a limited amount of information that's specifically related to the campaign topic. But something that we keep in mind when we plan future campaigns, that we want to make sure that we ask you to do participate with a certain set of materials, and that we have related things to share with you later as for those who missed the first go round of that. And then we had some unexpected results as well.
Yeah, I guess one of the things I found particularly interesting was the fact that even though that decreased amount of time per visit happened, we still had a significant, in this case, 9% increase in the amount of time, the total amount of time that was being spent.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And we also see as a first realm of findings that this template that we've used and this experience has been successful. And now we have other participating staff and other, so the museums and archives that are already contributing to Transcription Center are wanting to participate in a coordinated campaign, but also other units are seeing that this is an exciting and interesting way to engage with the public, and
they're initiating their own ideas for these campaigns and coordinating them. So it's not just something that's being pushed from Transcription Center or Fieldbook Project. This is something that's being recognized as a great way to interact, to get the material transcribed, and a doable structure.
That's very true. So then we asked ourselves, was this just this one time happen? Is this only one time that we can have this experience? Is it lightning in a bottle, or can lightning strike twice? And obviously, spoiler, it can. So then we analyzed a fossil Fossick. So if you recall, FWTrueLove was a campaign that we ran in February of 2015. In October of 2015, remember we had our set of collaborators, and in this particular case, I would say the leading charge kind of came from Fieldbook Project and Smithsonian Institution Archives. During Fossil Fossick, this was a lead-in to Fossil Week, which was led by Biodiversity Heritage Library. So working with Biodiversity Heritage Library, this was a way to warm everybody up into the experience that was coming ahead, and a lot of really fantastic, if you want to go back and look into, dive into social media, you can look up Fossil Week from 2015, and you'll have the opportunity to see interaction with scientists and just really, really fascinating material. So for Fossil Fossick, we used the same kind of method of comparing the interaction and transcription activity.
Which is interesting because the results were similar, but definitely not the same.
Mm-hmm.
Which speaks to the fact that this does not happen in a vacuum.
Right, that's right. Nothing in the Transcription Center
happens
in a vacuum, which is usually why someone asks me a question about Transcription Center, I say, it depends. It depends. But this set of information again showed that if nothing else, there's consistency in the increase of visits to the site from the before period to the campaign period. There is an increase in pages transcribed, and there's an increase in the active volunteers. And also a comparable situation of a decrease in length of visit, average length of visit. The after time period is, again, not occurring in a vacuum. That was when we launched air and space materials. So we had the Apollo stowage lists, the stowage inventories, which were very popular. And you'll notice, actually, again, in this particular time period, in the after time period, the length of visit actually decreases even more so, the average length of visit. And that was because a number of people came to projects. Unfortunately, after the stowage lists were so popular, they were transcribed very quickly. So people were coming maybe a week after the announcement, a week after a blog post, and finding the projects were completed, and then either leaving or leaving to try and read and find more information, potentially using those transcribed stowage lists for other purposes as well. So this is the situation where we can say, like, this campaign style, this approach does seem to have a replicable result in increasing visits to site, increasing the number of pages transcribed, increasing the number of active volunteers during the time period as well. The one thing that's a little bit different about Fossil Fossick is we did not ask for, we were transcribing 3 sets of material, Cooper, Lad.
Oh, yeah.
And
Lad. I love Lad.
And some of you made great observations about Lad's field notes as well. And so we were transcribing, in some ways, connected and related material, but not as tightly or as coherently connected as the first campaign.
Right.
And we've not had the opportunity yet to kind of dive in a little more deeply into some of these sets of campaign materials, but we may be able to in the future. So that might be something to investigate. This was one of our announcements for Time for a Fossil Fossick. And if you do not know, the word fossick means to kind of have a dig around to kind of like surface gold. So we know that all of the transcribed field notes have little gems hidden within their pages. So we wanted you to have a play with those materials. So in general, our findings are that there are long-term benefits for campaigns.
It seems like when we look at the numbers that this may be essentially a internal way of making the community grow. That it is that these small campaigns are seeding.
Yeah.
Thank you. I like that.
Yeah.
Seeding a community to grow.
Yeah.
I like that. And so thus I'm now adding myself to
you are part of it.
Okay, thank you.
You are part of it. I think you could say it's like kind of like fertilizing it, right? Like this is the campaign is a bit of, Miracle Grow.
Yeah. We show an example of what you guys can find on your own, and which you do, but making it a little easier to find those paths to the background information.
So we say, humans love stories. So what we speculate is that a campaign really lets us tell a story through a specific set of materials to invite you all to surface the main narrative that we know about already, but also the subplots and the plot twists that are occurring within the field notes as well.
Yeah, because I know the Cliff Notes versions, but I don't get to spend this nearly as much time as you guys. And I'm always amazed at things you find that I missed.
Right.
I'm actually a little jealous.
And in general, we think that the campaign activities in between, let's say, launches of new material the campaigns seem to reinvigorate and then create sustained activity during non-campaign times. And so this is one of the ways that we investigated this. So this is a map of or graph, of the time periods of January 2015 through December 2015. And you will see that a couple of things are occurring here. First of all, the red bars, I just gave them an arbitrary value of 200 so that we could clearly see when a campaign email occurred. So pay no attention to the information here on the side, or the ranking of the red bars. But what we're just trying to show is that this is a time period where we're looking at active volunteers on site in these weeks. So our transcription center statistics sometimes are provided in a weekly format, and in the weekly format we're able to see how many people were active on site during this time period. So a couple of things immediately stand out. You can see a dip in the summer time period. That's pretty consistent across the lifespan of the transcription center so far, and I'm hoping that we're going to do some really interesting things to combat that U shape there. You'll also see that the matchup of campaign emails and spikes in active volunteers are fairly clear. So you've got a couple of things going on. One, the yellow arrow on the left-hand side is pointing to the FWTrueLove campaign, and on the right-hand side, it's pointing to the Fossick Challenge, and the slightly obscured column that's just past that is actually from the We Dig Bio campaign. So again, three kind of types of engagements, which included a campaign email and outreach to volunteers around specific sets of activities, and you can see an increase in active volunteers. The second very interesting thing that we discovered when looking at this graph is that really significant dip actually in the week before, every single time in the week before that campaign email, and sustained activity, again with the exception in the nothing happens in a vacuum, with the exception in the November, I think everyone was exhausted after We Dig Bio. I was exhausted after We Dig Bio. So anyway, that they have this kind of really interesting rolling effect. So a dip, and then a really large increase, and then a slight gradual tapering again. And across time, if we were looking across the 3 years of transcription center's life, you would see that the number and the levels of activity have a really slow growing growth from left-hand side to right-hand side, so increasing growth, which again, sustainable growth.
I like that.
Yes. So these are our general conclusions about coordinated social media campaigns. And this is the first bullet, is the thing that Lesley was just referring to. So this is this idea of, again, it's a guided tour. If you were to come in person to the Smithsonian Institution's museums, you would maybe have the opportunity to, you could lead yourself, you could probably find a guide. If you came with a school group, you're likely to have a guide who's taking you through and showing you points of interest. And a campaign offers this similar opportunity, where particularly when you're bringing many knowledgeable and enthusiastic people into the same space together. So if we have Nick Pienson, we have Biodiversity Heritage Library, we have Fieldbook Project, we have Smithsonian Institution Archives, Smithsonian Libraries, and everybody has one little part of the story that they want to surface or tell, that makes a very exciting experience for everybody. We also know, or we believe, that what we offered in these campaigns really do speak to the motivations that you've reported to us. And so again, we would really be interested in your feedback if you feel that's true. So that's learning, the opportunity to collaborate and be a part of a community, the opportunity to give back to something bigger, and to also enjoy the challenge of both the challenge at hand within the campaign and the individual micro challenges of deciphering words or those kinds of things.
Abbreviations.
Yep.
Random symbols.
One of the benefits of being in a social media space is that we can reach across audiences. So we know that some parts of the Smithsonian have very large audiences that may not be engaging with content in this way. So in the sense of they are usually a little bit maybe more consuming information. But by doing cross promotion in a campaign period, we offer the opportunity for those audiences to become involved and to be actively participating and engaging with Smithsonian collections.
Also see other sides of the Smithsonian. I mean, if you, like with Smithsonian libraries, you tend to see the same type of, they interact with the material in a very specific way. As we've cross-promoted, it's really allowed those audiences to see the different sides. And even, I think, for the staff, I know working on the Fieldbook project, we often have a very, very small staff on the project. And so having a chance to work more closely with you, and especially with BHL, which of course has a much larger audience and staff at Smithsonian Libraries, and seeing how each of those departments manages their interaction, it has been really informative. There's particular opportunities with these kinds of campaigns to really demonstrate the value to scientists, and also to provide, to both surface what it means for active scientific researchers to have this kind of information available to them, and then also is the opportunity to, as we say, to interact with staff in a way that neither the staff nor the public would usually have the opportunity to interact. So again, these kinds of surfacing behind the scenes opportunities, making connections, or showcasing the knowledge that our staff members have here at the Smithsonian Institution, whether
from whether as part of their disciplinary knowledge or a hobby. You know, we've had opportunities to have staff members share more about their experiences and background of the excitement that they share about Smithsonian's collections, which is great. And then we also think that this campaign opportunity is a chance for people who are coming new to the site during a campaign to learn really quickly about what it means to be a volunteer, what it means to do transcription and to do review, and to feel part of the adventure and the excitement around that activity, which then again can potentially sustain interaction and activity after the campaign event. But you don't have to take our word for it. So let's offer you a little reading rainbow of some feedback. So some of you volunteers who are watching may recognize yourself in the pages. So these are some of the, again, we mentioned that we feel, and we maybe have not explained as coherently as we could have, that we perceive the types of citizen science engagement that are occurring with transcription, with crowdsourced transcription. But in particular, these moments or aspects of learning. One of those things is that our volunteers were engaging with science and history in a way that perhaps they do in their everyday lives, but they surfaced information and made connections between what was occurring in the field notes and also contemporary activity and things like that. So I love this one. Still true. A Smithsonian curator writes in 1895 that pupils are carelessly dressed, restless, all hate school. And then also Laura made comments about lack of science funding, and that is, you know, in a contemporary time period, people may suggest that that's a crisis, that's a new crisis. And actually what we're showing is this was not a new crisis. This was something that was occurring even then. There was struggle to communicate effectively what was important scientific research, and also make the case for further funding. And also we were able to surface that the real kind of scientific work that was occurring, you know, tracking data, tracking specimens, and the reality of diligent scientific work. So that was one set. So having a fun time with FWTrueLove.
Yeah, this is the stuff that I.
Yep.
Heartbeats.
So a combination here of describing the experience of transcribing together, that it was truly lovely, that the opportunity to see behind the scenes with looking in the rare books, and you know, in that experience, Nick, you can go back and take a look at this well, but Nick was able to like hold up to the camera the handwriting of these people, comments in the margins, and you just really realize the material experience of science. It's kind of mind-blowing. And then also, you know, the different, as you said at the beginning of our hangout, Lesley, this idea of the context of what life was like in these particular context and time period. Very motivating. And then we see that volunteers and those who were observing were actually doing science, just doing science. So Meg, shout out to Meg here, who was describing the fact that reading the correspondence made her return to some birding practice, and then, you know, that Nick, we were all having a good time. We were having citizen science. So one of the exciting outcomes of this project for me was that Meg and other volunteers wanted to take the FWTrueLove, the transcribed text, to eBird, which is another citizen science project. If you're interested in birding and you have not explored eBird, I would recommend that you do, to record observations in your local environment, or I suppose you can just do it at home. And also some activity Laura Siobhan also does with Biodiversity Heritage Library, and I think Michelle and Meg are participating in that as well, which is connecting content and sources, so field notes with original sources and vice versa in Biodiversity Heritage Library.
And I think this is a part I just find so wonderful in terms about the transcription community of, if someone asks me what Transcription Center is, it is so much more than just transcribing the pages. So much more activity is going on there in terms of finding connections. And so much of the connections that we're trying to make at Smithsonian are things that we're discovering as we go along, are these conversations of finding these other projects. And it's these informal conversations that make that possible, because we're figuring this out as we go along. We're all figuring, the staff, the volunteers, we're all figuring this out as we go along. And so we have to try different things out to see if it's going to work. So seeing that in Twitter, I like reading Twitter. Yeah,
it's really exciting. And again, you know, we mentioned that we asked people to use this hashtag, but actually made it very useful to be able to, after the fact, demonstrate to not just obviously, we're so excited to share this analysis with you, but to be able to kind of pull that information together, or to share it with somebody who was not, someone who, let's just say a staff member who has no idea or background about Transcription Center, they can very easily see what it means to participate in a coordinated campaign because of the hashtag, which, you know, the being able to pull that information together. And that pretty much wraps up our this realm and range of analysis. We know that we've had some questions we want to answer for you, but we also want to say again, you know, please feel free to get in touch with us if you have other comments or questions. We can also tell you more, and we have a little bit more detailed version of how we gathered this information and how we performed some of the analysis that we performed, and some additional elements of analysis that we didn't share here, but may be of interest to you, particularly if you're watching and you are interested in running a campaign yourself. We can tell you more about the way that we coordinated this information and brought you know, 4, 5, 6 groups of people together in order to make this happen in a couple of different time periods. So no, these are also, if I'll share out, I think I did not already share out the slides, but I will share the slides, and you are welcome to use these resources if you'd like to see them. We've got some of the Transcription Center projects that were transcribed. We've got our summary from the FWTrueLove Challenge, and we also have some of the Google Hangouts with Nick Pienson, so you could catch up on those if you wanted to. All right, so we're gonna stop sharing. We're back. Hello. Since we've been here the whole time.
Yep, there you go.
So let's dive into a couple of questions. So again, tweet your questions if you'd like to. I've got the tweets here standing by. But we had some pre-identified questions before the Hangout that came in. One of those things that we already answered the first question, which is how do we choose which projects to highlight? But maybe we can allude to an upcoming campaign and how we selected that material. Should we? Yeah,
at least allude.
It's coming soon, coming down the line. Soon. So in this one that is upcoming, which you will find out more about soon, maybe within 8 or 9 days, you will hear about this. That particular set of materials was surfaced actually by a person who's a subject matter expert in the material. So I guess technically Nick Pienson is a subject matter expert as well when he surfaced the FW.
Yeah, so I guess similar in terms of this is someone who actually already knew at least aspects of the material very well, and so was able to help us come up with a discrete group of materials in order to build a campaign and a story and experience around.
Right. So that is again another pathway of how we choose some of the materials that are highlighted for transcription. Or that we specifically highlight in a campaign for transcription. And then just a brief comment about We Dig Bio 2015, which was, again, a targeted time period, but less about specific sets of materials, but generally related to biodiversity material, transcribing biodiversity collections, specimens, labels. We focused in the Smithsonian Transcription Center on the entomology collection, so we went B by B. Anyway, B by B. And we have been planning for We Dig Bio 2016, which we will... I think one of the discussion points right now in the planning is what will be the focus campaign and what sorts of material will be shared across transcription platforms. We Dig Bio is another coordinated event, but at a much larger scale because it's across several transcription platforms. So we can probably give some more feedback on later how those projects are selected But in general, the general pathway for these kinds of campaigns has been there has actually been a research need or subject matter expertise around the material, and that's how those things were selected.
It's been around materials that are created usually by one person, or there's something that makes it a priority for a staff member or researcher,
right?
So that we're able to build something specific around those materials.
Right. So the next question is, which social media platform gives you the most bang for your buck? This is a good question. And we actually we shared some of this information before with some other staff members, and they asked a similar question because some of those people are a little bit more invested in other social media spaces, so specifically Tumblr and places like that. I think Tumblr is a great platform. I do personal research, academic research in Tumblr. I think it's a really interesting space. This particular campaign, actually most of the campaigns we've run in this way, we do surface in Facebook, but I think we were mostly using Twitter. You can tell me if you think that was different.
I mean, in terms of at least the way I experienced it through the campaigns, we were using blog posts and such to at least announce information and share findings throughout, but in terms of actually seeing the kind of interaction that was going on virtually, Twitter was huge.
Right.
I mean, especially for me, just in terms of watching the activity as an outsider, it was one place where everything co-locates. You don't have to dig through the existing websites of other participants.
Yeah.
It all natural language searching as a librarian. I love the fact I can go to that hashtag and pull everything together, and you're not having to also then dig through the stats of other the other departments, the other units that are taking part to see all of the activity that's going on during the campaign.
Right. Another thing that was a benefit of using Twitter is now Twitter has implemented some changes, but at the time it was a very open social media network, social networking platform. It was open in the sense that everything is presented chronologically in the particular time periods that we've run these two campaigns. So they've since implemented to some extent some algorithmic work which changed the way some parts of the information is shared. But when we ran these campaigns, anybody can see the conversations that are occurring in the sense of you don't have to be a member of Twitter to see those conversations. So we know we have volunteers who don't participate in social media, even though this was a social media campaign. They could still participate because we could provide them a link where they could easily see the chronologically sequenced tweets that related to FWTrueLove.
They could read the virtual conversations.
They could read the virtual conversations even if they did not want to create an account to participate in the conversations in that way. So that again is an additional benefit, I think, of using this particular platform. Some similar things can happen in some of the other platforms. And I think as we move forward, we may start to integrate some other platforms, including Instagram. We're on Instagram, and that's a place to share. I would say that is maybe a place we would share behind the scenes details rather than maybe some of the communication that's occurring. So next question. So that was our general response is Twitter gave us the most bang for our buck, but we were specifically working within Twitter. So we haven't had an opportunity to evaluate some of the other platforms. This question relates to some of the things that you've mentioned before. Do the people who highlight particular projects know what's in there already, or are the transcription discoveries surfaced by volunteers? Are they a surprise?
I think it's a mix. I think there's definitely material that we're not expecting. I know when I suggested materials for Transcription Center, there is a lot that comes up that I don't recognize. I think that's true for any of the projects, the connections and such, that the amount of time we have to spend as staff on these materials, you develop a knowledge of them, but you rarely have time to really dig into them as deeply as you might like to. It's always on the list. And then the other things come in and supersede it. So having those things, I guess, sort of like a campaign in terms of it highlights that for us.
Right.
So in terms of that dialogue, it's wonderful to have someone kind of pinpoint these are things you should be looking at.
Also, if you think about any sort of interpretive lens that you're using, you may be really interested in, or your brain may be naturally drawn to certain things within the text. But when someone else provides you with a sets of observations, particularly across related sets of correspondence or field notes, it's mind expanding.
Yes.
It's like participating in the sociological imagination. You suddenly, like, this knowledge blossoms of, oh, that was related to this other thing that I already knew. So, you know, anytime you have these sorts of collaborative discussions or a combination of surfacing discoveries that you may know and discoveries you don't know,
it broadens your frame of reference.
That's right. It gives you that wider context, broadens your frame of reference, and it's
good stuff.
It's good stuff, indeed. So the next question is, do we find the quality of transcription decreases if we impose time limits?
I haven't seen any.
Yeah, we haven't noticed that. So Lesley and I did a little bit of evaluation of some of the field notes.
Now. Yeah.
We, in this particular subset of materials, some of them were from FWTrue, or were they all from FWTrue?
No, I think I pulled them from several different projects and types of projects. And
so we both evaluated 200 pages worth of content, and we found in those 200 pages, we found 8 errors.
Across all of them?
Across all of them.
Yeah.
So in general, remember the general workflow of the transcription center is even if a page is completed, you can surface it and we can reopen it. So there's always that kind of built in. But secondarily, we did not find any changes in the consistency of the items that were transcribed during the campaign versus the items that are transcribed in the normal workflow time period.
Yeah, honestly, a very, very high rate of consistency.
Yeah, and I think Lesley and I have discussed before that in general, if the rate of acceptability from OCR scans is 80% accuracy, we're way past 99% accuracy. Again, this is a particularly small subset of material to which we're referring. And some of the challenges also come in with how we do annotation and indicating certain things that are occurring on pages. So we are looking forward to doing, well, I say we, when I say we, in this case, I actually mean me, doing a little bit more thorough investigation of the quality so that we can report on, in a more consistent way, what are the challenges in transcription. I usually observe that the challenges in the quality of transcription relate to consistency. So page by page, if it's something that looks like a table or a ledger or something like that, those page by page, if transcribed by different people, may appear visually different because each volunteer working on these pages has interpreted that page differently. So and we kind of use, depending on the template, we maybe allow people to use a little bit of first person there, sets the standard of how you might lay out columns or something like that. And second thing is that the kinds of errors spelling errors that are seen, I believe, tend to be best guesses at words that are either scientific names or a person's name that it's just illegible. And to everyone who has both transcribed and reviewed it, it was not clear what that word was. And a third person, fourth person, fifth person may come along and say, I know what that word is, it's this. And then we have the opportunity to update that.
Yeah, and at least in terms of anything where it was black and white in terms of it was an error, we hardly found any in those 200 pages. It was exactly what you're describing of. It was something where it was really more of an opinion in terms of how to closely match what was on the transcribed page.
Right. Not related to a campaign event, but just an example again of an external person making an observation of an error on a page. I recently had an email from a researcher who had come to the transcription center by Googling, by researching the early scrapbook of aeronautica, which is shared by Smithsonian libraries, and wrote and said, because this person was a subject matter expert, knew that the date that was listed on the page was incorrect because the people about whom the discussion was occurring were not born when the date. So it was the date was supposed to be, I think, 1782, but it had been written as 1712. And so this researcher said, just wanted to let you know there's an error on this page. But when I looked at it, I thought, well, that's really hard to tell. It does look like it says 1712. And if you didn't have subject matter expertise, you might not know that wasn't possible. So again, we take input from the public in a variety of ways, whether it's someone who's actively participating in the transcription center or a researcher. And then another question was, do the campaigns result in more volunteers? And so we did see an increase in participation, as we showed in obviously this question came in before the presentation. So the answer is yes, it does result in more volunteers. And we think, but we need to investigate more clearly whether or not those volunteers' life cycles are sustained. So for example, if you're a volunteer and you're starting your transcription experience, during a campaign, do you stay longer on site? Like do you come back and do you stay back, come back and transcribe more because you started during a campaign and it was exciting versus starting in the more normal experience of transcribing? I hope the answer is no, that it's across the board. So I hope to disprove my own question. And then we had some feedback again on the time limits, that there some feedback from volunteers that time limits don't really speak to the realities of having to decipher things on the page. Like it might take you 2 hours to figure out something on the page. And I think that we in general recognize that. We would hope that, and we do actually, this is a good point. When we are finalizing the selections.
Part of that selection criteria is trying to figure out what is going to be the most legible, because we have definitely turned down some things because we thought, you know what, this is not nice. We don't want to not be putting this up with a time limit.
We don't want anyone pulling their hair out over transcribing.
Frustrated. So that is actually one of the criteria as we choose what materials are going to create the best experience.
Yes.
Create the output, create the excitement, a chance to learn, but not set a challenge that's going to make you not want to come back.
If we have the opportunity with the material that's available to us, we're going to pick a combination of something of a challenging item, a less challenging item, a related item that provides context, to look at the two. Yeah.
Like when I've been wanting to put Waldo Schmidt up for a while, and I gotta tell you, there are just fabulous quotes in Waldo Schmidt, and I actually chose some of the most legible materials. So it gets far worse. Unfortunately, a lot of the people who have the best stories in their materials are often the ones with worst handwriting. So it's
I think maybe the people with the very best stories didn't keep notes about it because they were they were out living. And then finally, one of the questions was, how do we decide on the ideal social media format? Or kind of, I guess this is a question about a combination of the content and the scheduling. And so we tried to speak to this briefly earlier in the presentation, but in general, we had some really structured scheduling of content at the start, and then some structured wrap-up stuff at the end. But in the middle,
a lot of it was built around responding. So it was, there was a beginning and an end and maybe one thing in the middle, but we were really trying to leave it as open to have potential information to provide, but really to be responding to what was exciting you about the material and the project.
And we frequently are thinking about, just being there, listening, being active. I usually describe this as being there. So there's a combination of, we want to schedule some content that maybe the content that we know is more stable. So for example, blog posts, links like that. But we want to be able to respond if you have a question about something to, if let's say you were coming on the fourth day and you wanted to get started, but you only had the campaign email. So you didn't know where's the best place to get started. You could communicate with us and we could help connect you with the opportunity, those kinds of things. So being there is particularly important. And then I think content-wise, we did a combination of, when I took a look at FWTrueLove and I was looking at the Smithsonian Transcription Center tweets, they are primarily text-based with sometimes with links. So in those cases, they're not using imagery as much. In general, across the board, tweets and other social media posts with images attached fare better. And so it was like the launch one had a picture and the wrap-up one, and then like one in the middle. And then the live tweeting obviously had lots of images as well.
I know, and at least from Fieldbook Project side, a lot of what we were doing was responding to questions, and so from that standpoint, it was almost all text. We weren't usually including images.
Yeah, so, but that's one of the things that we want to think about in the future is how, to what extent can we prepare images in advance that could be used to answer questions and could create more dynamic calls to action. So I guess I would maybe say that it depends on the content of our communication, depends on what we are trying to communicate. So if we're trying to answer questions, that tends to be text-based. If we're trying to create a call to action, that tends to include imagery and links because we are hoping to make it seem interesting enough to jump into a page and get started. Or we may say, we've had other examples where someone has said, oh, I've transcribed this, but I need someone else to review it. So we would want to say, here's a call to action, and here's the link, and things like that. And then I think we had a couple of gifts. The extremely talented Richard Naples provided some gifts for FWTrueLove, and I think for Fossick as well, which was wonderful. That's hi Richard. He's from Smithsonian Libraries and was able to share that content. And yeah, I think again, remember we're mostly referring to Twitter, so that has some limitations on how we share particular types of content, as well as the length of the content that can be shared. So I think if we were doing an Instagram campaign, a campaign that was led through Instagram, we may use a different approach. That would be interesting. It would be interesting.
I wonder if we can do that with the next one.
We'll see. We'll talk offline about that.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me take a look really quickly just to see if we have any other questions that have cropped up during our discussion. So I'm just scrolling back through here. See, one observation from Siobhan about, does the dip before the campaign emails and the campaign starts relate maybe to projects that are in the TC? I think in generally it does. So another type of campaign that we run within the Transcription Center would be a 7-day review challenge. And we actually haven't done a 7-day review challenge in quite some time, because although we have a lot of things that maybe need to be reviewed, we want to make sure that there's things that are related, things that would come in to close them. And every time I've gathered enough information or enough kind of projects at hand to do a 7-day review challenge, those things have been reviewed. So it's moving at a pace a little bit more quickly. But that would be an example where there's like fewer active volunteers on site because there's less to do on site. There's fewer projects at that moment in time. I'd have to investigate that, I think, a little bit more. Let's see. Get some more questions. And well, I know in general that I've had some questions from people who are hoping to create similar kinds of campaign experiences with their various citizen science projects. And so one thing, again, that we would love to hear from you is your feedback on some of the interpretations we've made of motivations and some of the other ways we've interpreted the response. So whether that's replies or time
are we accurate?
Yeah. Are we all?
Have we gotten this right? Because we've looked at a lot of numbers. But
yeah, and we would really like to, most importantly, it's not about necessarily validating our interpretation, it's about making better experiences. And we know that we have, as Lesley has indicated, there's some pretty cool stuff. So we want to make sure that we're finding the right types of material to share with you that match your interests and your desire to participate.
The kind of access that you're looking for when you're going through this.
Yeah.
Because we've got great stuff. We've got more stuff. We got great people.
Right.
We just need to make sure we're putting it out there
and all together.
That's engaging you.
That's right. So I guess we'll go ahead and wrap up for today. So thank you for joining us, and thank you as always for the time that you share with us, for sharing your discoveries. Never think that we are not interested in hearing those. You might think, oh, I'm probably the only person that thinks this is interesting, and I can guarantee you that if anybody's going to think it's really interesting, it's going to be us. We are always wanting to know what sorts of discoveries you're making within the pages you're transcribing or the questions that you have. And hopefully, if you have questions, we can get back to you quickly. If there is a delay in responding to some of your questions, just hope that you'll give us a little bit of patience. It's mostly me answering questions on this Transcription Center side, and mostly Lesley working on the Fieldbook project side. So we're trying to get to those answers or find those connections or connect you with other people to answer those questions as quickly as we can. And as we mentioned earlier, now that you have learned about the impact of the FWTrueLove campaign and the Fossil Fossick campaign, we hope you will pay attention for maybe another campaign that's coming up soon, and it's going to be really interesting. And also, if you're brand new and you've never transcribed with us before, please feel free to join us. Again, you don't have to create an account to get started, but if you do, we're able to provide you a My Work page, which gives you an overview of your activity. And you can do that at https://transcription.si.edu. And again, we really just cannot begin to thank you enough for joining us for these campaigns and for joining us today, and also for the time that you shared to make Smithsonian collections better. And again, we always want to hear from you and figure out how we can make transcription better, both for you and for use your suggestions about new volunteers, how to make it a better experience for everybody. So you help us make the project better for you and for us and for everyone else. And we thank you again. Thanks. Bye.